I'm Alex of All Trades, and this is TV Tuesday. I'm back with another Downton Abbey breakdown. In this video, I will be recapping seasons 1 through 3 for the older generations. I've already covered the younger generation, which makes up the bulk of the show's intrigue, so if you haven't watched those yet, please do. Links in the description below. Who are these people? We have Violet Crawley, the Dowager Countess of Grantham, played by the wonderful Maggie Smith. Whoa! Not that Maggie Smith. This one. Then we have her daughter, the widowed Lady Rosamund Painswick, and her son, Robert Crawley, the current Earl of Grantham and owner of Downton Abbey. Then his wife, an American heiress and current Countess of Grantham, Cora Crawley, née Levinson. Next, we have the Crawleys' distant cousin and middle-class widowed retired nurse, Isobel Crawley, mother of company lawyer Matthew Crawley, and whom you may recognize from Shaun of the Dead. Other people covered in this video include Dr. Clarkson, Lord Merton, Lord and Lady Flincher, also known as Shrimpy and Susan, Spratt, Denker, Mrs. Levinson, Harold Levinson, Prince and Princess Corrigan, and Lady Shackleton. These old fogies typically are not the center of drama. Instead, they facilitate it by sharing secrets, inviting people to meals, yes, that means a lot on this show, and sometimes they are at the center too. So what's the deal with these people? Robert is informed that the Titanic has sunk and expresses sadness for the people who weren't in first class, not yet knowing that his heir has been lost as well. And it comes as quite a shock. Robert, Cora, and Violet are upset that they've lost Patrick especially, but Cora and Violet, who've never gotten along, wish to fight the entail so that Downton Abbey and Cora's money will go to Mary, but Robert is resigned to it. Robert is angry that a duke that came to visit toyed with Mary's affections. Violet and Cora also discuss possibly getting Cora's money out of the estate, but Downton Abbey can't survive without it, so Robert won't even consider it. Robert has also hired a new valet, Bates, who was his Batman in the previous war, and who, despite all the naysaying from Cora and the servants, Robert decides to keep on. Robert sends a letter to Matthew Crawley. Isobel and Matthew arrive and move into Crawley House, which Robert owns. Isobel and Matthew frequently fight over how he doesn't want to change now that he's the heir, and how she wants to make sure they present themselves well to the Crawley family. Isobel actually does handle being waited on very well, but Violet and her have a bad first meeting, mostly due to Violet's cheeky mouth. On Cora's urging, Isobel gets involved with the village hospital, run by Dr. Clarkson. Isobel suggests a procedure her husband, who was also a doctor, did several times for dropsy to save a tenant farmer's life, but at first Dr. Clarkson doesn't want to do it. Violet, who is the president of the hospital, and Isobel have a kind of tug-of-war over this and Dr. Clarkson, but Dr. Clarkson does the procedure, especially at the urging of the farmer's wife, and it works, much to Violet's chagrin and Isobel's triumph. But Dr. Clarkson asks Robert to protect him from Violet's wrath, who agrees and makes Isobel the chairman of the hospital board. Violet and Cora think that Mary should marry Matthew, but continue to discuss how they might break the entail. Robert impresses upon Matthew how all the servants want their jobs. Robert also has to work out someone blackmailing one of his servants, who tries to hand in his notice, but Robert refuses it out of kindness. Cora hurts another servant's feelings by dressing her down for bad-mouthing Matthew. Cora invites Evelyn Napier to stay at Downton Abbey, but he's showing a Mr. Pamuk around, so Cora invites him as well, under the impression that English hospitality can affect politics. She tasks a reluctant Mary with entertaining them. Cora is woken up in the middle of the night to take command of the death of Mr. Pamuk in Mary's bed. They take his corpse back to his room. Cora is pissed at Mary but won't tell anyone, including Robert, what happened. The next day, the family has to deal with the dead body and discuss how horrible it is, with Cora keeping mum. Robert meets Tom Branson and offers him the free use of his library. Violet has Matthew look into how the entail might be broken, but he tries to hide what he learns from her and tell Robert only. But Violet and Mary find him out, and the information is very upsetting to them. Robert is pleased with Matthew as his heir, and Cora tries to comfort Mary over Robert's fondness for Matthew to no avail. Isobel misdiagnoses an issue with Mosley's hands, which Violet catches and gloats over having the real diagnosis, much to Isobel's chagrin. The village flower show is approaching, of which Cora is the head judge and Violet wins every year. When Isobel learns this, she smells a rat and asks Violet to relinquish her hold on the judges. Violet is insulted and claims that they judge fairly, but when she announces the winner, she gives it to Mosley's father, who has always wanted to win. And Robert and Cora are very proud of her. Rosamund has sent a letter to Robert stating that Mary's character has been besmirched, and he asks Cora about it, who's quiet, but she tells Mary about the rumors. Cora argues with Mrs. Patmore, who refuses to make a new pudding because the menu is already set. Cora capitulates and suggests to Mrs. Hughes that she look after Daisy, whom Cora is concerned will get the brunt of Mrs. Patmore's ire. She invites Sir Anthony Strallan to dinner, whom she was thinking of as a suitor for Mary, but she is pleased by Edith catching his interest instead. Robert and Violet don't approve of Sybil getting involved in politics, which Robert blames on Tom. When she's injured at a political event, Robert wants to fire him but can't, or Sybil will run away. Cora learns that a more accurate account of what happened with Pamuk is being spread about Mary. Violet learns it too from Lady Susan Flincher and confronts Cora about it, who confirms it. Violet is angry, then realizes that she would have done the same thing as Cora. Cora is ecstatic that Matthew has proposed to Mary, but then worried because Mary thinks she should tell him about Mr. Pamuk before accepting. Violet and Cora decide that they will send Mary to Rome if she refuses Matthew. The London season is over and most of the family come back to Downton Abbey. Robert buys a telephone. Violet's maid has quit and she asks Cora to help her look for a replacement. Cora sees Dr. Clarkson because she is 4 months pregnant, and if she has a boy, then he will be Robert's heir. Robert wants to give Isobel and Matthew Crawley House as a compensation for the possible loss of the earldom. Rosamund tells Mary to wait to give Matthew her answer, but Violet thinks she should accept him now, but break off the engagement if Cora has a son. Isobel believes Violet is behind Mary's hem-hawing over Matthew's proposal, but Violet explains that it is Rosamund's doing. Cora places an ad for Violet's new lady's maid. She talks to Mrs. O'Brien about breaking in a lady's maid. She takes a bath and drops her soap. While Mrs. O'Brien is out of the room, Cora gets out of the tub, steps on the soap, falls, and miscarries the baby. Dr. Clarkson tells them it was a boy, and both Cora and Robert are very upset. Violet tells Mrs. O'Brien that she doesn't want to bother Cora, but needs the replies to the ad for the replacement lady's maid Cora's been helping her with. Violet blames Rosamund for the falling out between Mary and Matthew. Isobel believes Matthew is making a mistake. Robert announces to the garden party guests and servants that England is now at war. Robert is back on active duty but wants to go to the front. He gets assigned to a battalion and is very excited to get in the thick of it. He learns, however, that his position is as a figurehead and that he will not be going to the front. When Bates gives his notice but won't say why, Robert is very angry and rude to him. Dr. Clarkson's village hospital is now only for wounded officers. Isobel visits to tell Robert, Cora, and Violet that Matthew is engaged and he and his fiancée are coming to visit. Isobel suggests to Sybil that she become a nurse and learn some basic skills. She calls out Mrs. O'Brien for eavesdropping on the conversation. Cora learns of this from Mrs. O'Brien. Violet is in support of the idea. Cora loves seeing how happy Sybil is learning how to make a cake. Robert is angry that some women are giving out white feathers to men not in uniform at a concert at the house and forces them to leave. Violet had asked Dr. Clarkson to write to the War Office to excuse some servants from duty, having lied to him about their having excusable conditions. Isobel learns of this, and the doctor and she confront Violet, who defends her actions. Dr. Clarkson is going to write to the War Office again, unexcusing one but not the other, at his request. Dr. Clarkson pushes for the release of an Officer Courtenay from the hospital as he is in recovery. When Officer Courtenay kills himself, Isobel suggests that Downton Abbey be turned into a convalescent home, but Violet is against it and even tries to forbid it. But Cora objects to this overreach of authority. Downton Abbey is converted into a convalescent home. Violet and Rosamund intrigue against Lavinia and Richard, so that Lavinia and Matthew will break up, but are blocked by Mary. Cora and Isobel vie for control of Downton Abbey, with Isobel even giving orders to the servants. When Evelyn Napier writes to the family saying he wishes to recover there, Cora says yes, but Dr. Clarkson and Isobel try to veto it. But Robert steps in and says in no uncertain terms that they will welcome whatever guests they wish, or Downton Abbey will be closed to the officers and nurses, much to Cora's pleasure. When Isobel tries to ask how they will keep Isis out of the patients' rooms, Robert says they won't. Dr. Clarkson decides that both Isobel and Cora will be in charge of Downton Abbey. Only Isobel is upset by this arrangement. Cora has taken command of Downton Abbey, and Isobel is upset that she has no power. When she threatens to leave, Cora supports that track, and Isobel is shocked her gambit didn't work. She goes to Dr. Clarkson, and he defends Cora, at which point Isobel decides to go to France to help find missing people, and she leaves. Robert is confused by Mary wanting to marry Sir Richard and not Matthew, and tells her to write Matthew to let him know that she is getting engaged. Violet also doesn't like Sir Richard because he threatened Lavinia with blackmail. She tells Mary that she is worried about Sybil getting close to men outside her class because of the war, and even warns Sybil off from this at dinner. Robert learns from Carson, who learned from Mrs. Hughes, who learned from Daisy, who overheard Thomas say that Bates was working at a pub in York. Robert tries to tell Anna, but she already knows, having learned from Mary, who learned from Sir Richard, who learned from his spies because Anna asked Mary to ask Sir Richard about Bates. Robert is ashamed of how he behaved the last time he saw Bates. Robert gets a call from the War Office that Matthew is missing because he asked, because Edith asked him to ask, because Daisy asked Edith. He tells Edith and swears her to secrecy. Robert visits Bates at the pub and apologizes and asks him to come back as his valet, and Bates accepts. Robert finally tells Cora that Matthew is missing, but he is fine, much to Robert's relief. Psych! He's not fine! A telegram comes for Isobel, but she's still in France, so Mosley brings it to Robert and Cora because it is from the War Office. Cora wrote to Lavinia for her to come to Matthew, and Robert is proud of Mary's behavior. Dr. Clarkson says Matthew will never walk again and tells Robert that Matthew will not be able to have children because he is now impotent. A new maid, Jane, applies to work at Downton Abbey. She's a war widow and her son lives in the village with her mother. Robert is informed about Jane's situation and he approves her employment, and later the two meet. Cora is too busy to spend any time with Robert. Robert is upset that Sir Richard printed his and Mary's engagement without her permission. Isobel arrives. The war is drawing to a close and the family will get Downton Abbey back soon, but Isobel wants them to use the house for some other charitable cause, much to Cora and Violet's dismay. Violet manages to steer Isobel away from Downton Abbey and instead to helping refugees, so she leaves to do so. Whilst Cora is too busy to spend time with Robert, he ends up eating lunch alone, but Jane is there and he asks about her son and his schooling. Later, the two run into each other in the library and it's obvious that Jane cares about him. Cora invites Lavinia back at Sir Richard's request since Mary can't have children with Matthew if the two get too close and marry. Once Lavinia shows up, Robert feels like Cora is sacrificing her to a life as nursemaid to Matthew just to protect Mary. Robert tells Mary that it is okay for her to take Carson with her when she and Sir Richard marry. Robert learns that a horribly disfigured Canadian officer staying at the house claims to be Patrick Crawley, but Robert doesn't really believe it. He talks to the officer and gets a written account of his story to be checked out by Murray, but is shocked when the officer does a weird gesture over his mouth. Robert still doesn't believe it, but reveals the officer's claims to the family. Later, Murray tells Robert that the officer could be instead Patrick's friend, Peter Crawley, and most of the family believe this is the actual case. The war has ended and the house is private again, inexplicably to Robert. Cora wants Matthew to move out of Downton Abbey. Robert stops on a walk to help Jane with some apples she dropped, and they bond over the deaths from the war. When going down to discuss the wine to be served at dinner, Robert and Jane talk and he kisses her and then apologizes, and she immediately forgives him. Cora wants to help Isobel with the refugees because she misses how busy and helpful she was during the war. This upsets Robert. Jane tries to give her resignation to Robert, but he won't accept it. Dr. Clarkson doesn't believe the tingling Matthew has felt in his legs means anything. But later, when Matthew stands, he apologizes to the family for messing up the diagnosis because he didn't want to raise everyone's hopes with a diagnosis that could lead them to believe there was recovery when it wasn't possible. Robert is happy to have Matthew and Lavinia marry at Downton Abbey, but Cora doesn't doesn't want this, so they fight behind closed doors. Violet tells Matthew that Mary still loves him and subtly but inappropriately tries to steer him away from marrying Lavinia to no avail. Robert learns that Carson has decided to stay at Downton Abbey because Sir Richard wanted Anna to spy on Mary for him. Robert is furious to learn that Sybil and Tom plan to marry, and he fires Tom right then and there. But Violet wants to know what their plan is. When Violet and Robert try to pressure her out of it, all attempts fail. Cora gets sick and retires early. Dr. Clarkson comes to examine several of the staff, Cora and Lavinia, and most of them have Spanish flu. Cora is sick all night with fever, tended to by Mrs. O'Brien. Due to Robert's help, Jane's son got into a good school. In his dressing room, they kiss a lot. But after they are interrupted without being discovered, Robert has a change of heart and says he's being unfair to her, so she leaves. When two more housemaids get sick, Robert is at first worried that Jane is one of them, but she's not. Isobel convinces Matthew and Lavinia that their wedding can't happen this weekend as planned due to the illness. Cora gets worse and is delirious. It even seems like she might die. But she recovers, and she apologizes to Robert for neglecting him. Robert and Jane meet a final time, and she will be leaving the house. But he gives her the contact information of his man of business so that her son will be provided for, and they kiss a final time. At Lavinia's funeral, Robert reconciles with Sybil and Tom. It's Christmas. Rosamund visits, and along with her comes Shore and Lord Hepworth, who likes her. Violet doesn't really like Lord Hepworth, but invites him to tea, where she presses him because she knows he's broke, and he's most likely pursuing Rosamund for her money. She tells him that he has to tell Rosamund that he's broke if he proposes. Shore and Lord Hepworth are seen talking together, but Shore passes it off as Lord Hepworth trying to get her to put in a good word with Rosamund for him. Despite learning of his financial situation, Rosamund still hasn't made up her mind. Robert and Violet plan to tie up Rosamund's money in case she marries Lord Hepworth. Rosamund breaks up with Lord Hepworth and fires Shore when Anna and Mary discover the two of them going into a bedroom, and they actually find them in bed together. The two were working her so that they could get her money, which really upsets Rosamund. Isis is missing, which has Robert worried, and he and the family and the servants go out looking for her, but they don't find her. A village child finds Isis, but Robert is surprised at Thomas's dedication since he ran across him all disheveled from looking for Isis, and decides to take him on as his valet. Violet manages to get Edith and Sir Anthony to meet again for the first time since the war, but he's lost the use of his arm, so she doesn't want to encourage their relationship. Cora is happy to learn that Sybil is pregnant, but Robert is unhappy, and they decide to keep it quiet. Later, Cora tells Robert that she wants to be involved in Sybil and Tom's life, which she has to state because they missed the wedding, telling everyone they were sick at the time. Robert doesn't understand why Mary is going to marry Sir Richard when she so clearly doesn't like him, so Cora finally comes clean about Mr. Pamuk. Robert reveals to Mary what Cora told him, and that he doesn't believe the threat of scandal from Sir Richard should mean that she commit to him for life. He wants her to find a better man. Isobel is mad at Matthew for letting Mary get away since Lavinia wouldn't want him to be unhappy. Robert has to break up an actual fight between Sir Richard and Matthew, and Violet just embarrasses Sir Richard in front of everyone. The family will not see him again. Isobel wants to send Sybil and Tom the money to come. They do come, and someone sent them the money, which has upset Robert, and everyone believes Isobel did it. Finally, Violet comes clean that she did it. Cora tries to welcome Tom as family despite the awkwardness. Mrs. Livingston is also coming to the wedding. She's a bit miffed that Cora's inheritance is going to Matthew and not her granddaughters, but actually Robert has lost all of the family money in a railroad scheme that was absorbed by the Canadian government, but he keeps it secret. Murray suggests that he break up the Downton estate, but Robert won't even consider it. Cora asks Robert if they can hire Mrs. O'Brien's nephew as footman, but he's not listening and okays it without knowing what he's agreeing to. After Robert learns that they hired someone, he tells Cora that he doesn't want anyone else hired. When he finally does tell her about the loss of her money, he breaks down, but Cora just comforts Robert. Robert decides he has to tell Mary before the wedding. At a dinner with some cousins, Lord Merton yells yells at his asshole son for being rude to Tom. Lord Merton apologizes to Tom for his son's behavior. He's very dignified and kind. Later, Tom tries to apologize to Violet and Isobel for behavior that wasn't his fault, and they say his apology isn't necessary. Then, they force him into a mourning coat for the wedding. Robert is more comfortable with Tom as his son-in-law after he helps prevent the wedding from falling apart. Mrs. Levinson is still at Downton Abbey. Violet wants Robert to ask Sir Anthony to end his relationship with Edith, and he agrees. He tells Sir Anthony to stay away from Edith, and Sir Anthony agrees to write Edith, telling her they can't see each other anymore. Robert's part in it is found out by Edith, and she and Mrs. Levinson gang up on Robert to relent. He does. Robert understands why Matthew won't take his new inheritance money to save Downton Abbey. Robert has to deny Carson more staff even though the war is over, but won't reveal to Carson why they can't hire more people. Violet and Mary plan to ask Mrs. Levinson for the money instead, but first plan to wow her with old money elegance, which would never have worked because Mrs. Levinson eschews traditions and finds the English stuffy. She also keeps baiting Violet, and Violet keeps falling for it, no matter how much she wants to butter up Mrs. Levinson. Cora does not support their plan, and Mary and her fight about Cora being American and Mary being English. Just before the fancy dinner, all of Robert's evening shirts go missing. On top of the shirts going missing, the oven won't work and a lot of people are coming for dinner. Mrs. Levinson saves the day by having food brought up from the larder and choosing to host the dinner instead as an indoor picnic. Violet and Mary are upset that their fancy dinner won't happen to impress Mrs. Levinson. Violet and Robert don't enjoy this party, and Mrs. Levinson makes Violet uncomfortable by singing a love song at her, which is hilarious. When Violet and Mary ask Mrs. Levinson for the money, she says she'll help, but she can't give any money as her husband tied it up after Robert's father pressured Cora into the entail. Before she leaves to go home, she apologizes to Robert for not being able to save Downton Abbey. Isobel is now helping former prostitutes find legitimate work. The family may have to move to a new house and decide they will wait until after Edith's wedding to tell the servants that they will be selling Downton Abbey. Violet doesn't want the wedding to go forward, and it doesn't due to none of her actions. When Sir Anthony leaves Edith at the altar, Robert is pissed, and Violet tries to bring the matter to a close quicker than Edith would have had it. The family will not have to sell Downton Abbey, as Matthew can take his inheritance. Robert tells Carson that he can hire 3 new employees, which immediately makes Matthew uncomfortable. When Matthew tries to tell Robert that things should change, Robert clearly doesn't want the running of the estate to be any different. Violet says she will support Matthew in his attempt to change things, but that it won't be easy. Robert, Matthew, and Edith discuss American women having the right to vote versus the English rules. Violet wants Edith to find something to do. Robert is pissed when the paper not only prints Edith's letter about the women's right to vote, but writes an article about it. Robert is angry to learn that Tom is wanted by the police and that he left Sybil behind in Ireland. Cora wants him to intercede on Tom's behalf legally just to help Sybil. Robert agrees to do it after a night's sleep, and when he and Tom trade barbs, Robert loses. Robert tells the family, including Sybil, that Tom is no longer allowed in Ireland and won't be arrested. Robert doesn't believe that Tom's gratitude is sincere. Isobel hires Ethel, but Mrs. Bird quits because she won't work with her. But Isobel stands by her decision, shocking Mrs. Bird. But Ethel can't cook, so Isobel soon figures out that all her meals at home are going to be awful. Robert brings in a pregnancy and labor specialist, Sir Tapsell, to handle Sybil's childbirth, which upsets Dr. Clarkson. But Robert no longer trusts him after he bungled Matthew's diagnosis and didn't foresee Lavinia's death. Cora still wants Dr. Clarkson involved. Tapsell is haughty, but Robert listens to him. Tapsell doesn't want Dr. Clarkson at the birth, but Cora stands her ground. Dr. Clarkson is worried about Sybil's labor, but Tapsell, seeming insulted, disagrees. Everyone but Robert wants to listen to Dr. Clarkson. The 2 doctors argue, with Dr. Clarkson calling for a C-section. Cora tells Tom that had it been her decision, she would have taken Sybil to the hospital an hour ago for the surgery. After Sybil gives birth, Cora tells Sybil that she will support her no matter what. After sleeping for a bit, the whole family is awoken because Sybil is dying. Dr. Clarkson was right. He tells them nothing can be done. Tapsell looks shocked and lost. Robert keeps repeating Sybil's age, not understanding how she could die so young. Cora is beside herself as Sybil dies. Alone with Sybil's body, Cora promises her that they will look after Tom and her daughter. She makes Robert sleep in his dressing dressing room. Cora tells the family that Isobel's death is Robert and Tapsel's fault. She's angry with Robert. Violet is confused by this and says it is just grief talking, but Robert says that Cora is right. Isobel plans a luncheon for the Downton Abbey ladies as a way of comforting them, but doesn't want Ethel to cook. When Ethel cooks anyway, Isobel is pissed. Robert learns that all of the women in his family will be served lunch by a former prostitute, and when he barges in to make them leave, Cora refuses, so the other women stay. Isobel decides to apologize to Ethel because the food was actually good. Cora flat out tells Robert that it was his clinging to tradition, what with Tapsel being gentry, that killed Sybil. Violet tells him that he should spend some time away from Cora to give her space and to prevent their disagreement from being more public. Violet then goes to Dr. Clarkson, asking him to lie without lying to Cora and Robert and state that Sybil would not have survived even with a C-section. This makes Dr. Clarkson uncomfortable, but he does it, so Robert and Cora reconcile. Robert thinks it is morbid for Tom to name his daughter Sybil, but no one agrees with him. He has a problem with everything Tom wants, including making Sybil Catholic, but he refuses to confront Tom on any of these things because he respects that Tom is grieving. But he does confront Mary about it, and she tells him she supports Tom's decisions. Robert still invites Travis to dinner to bash Catholics. Not that it works. Robert and Matthew argue because Matthew wants to involve Tom in the running of the estate. Robert gets a talking to from Mary about the fact that things are changing, whether he likes it or not. Robert and Violet are against Edith writing a column, but when Edith explains how important it is to her, Violet changes her mind. But Violet publicly supports, then crushes Edith. Robert is still against changes in how the estate is run. He and Jarvis argue with Matthew. At a second meeting that includes Murray, who states that the estate has been mismanaged for generations, Jarvis quits. Violet suggests to Robert and Cora that they hire Tom as the estate agent. Robert says he'll do it with Matthew's blessing, but that he's sure Tom will fail. Violet and Robert are very uncomfortable at Sibby's Catholic christening. The annual house versus village cricket match approaches. Robert is always intense about it, but the house usually loses. Robert keeps pressuring Tom to play, who keeps refusing, and Cora protects Tom. Isobel and Violet trade barbs over Violet's involvement in the raising of her own kids. Cora decides to support Matthew and Tom's plans for the estate, but is against Tom and Sibby moving into the estate agent house. Robert doesn't want to take farms from the tenants and suggests instead they invest the money they have in the original Ponzi scheme. When everyone is against this and for the new plans, Robert acts like a sore loser and says he'll take a back seat from now on. He changes his tune after Tom tells him that he knows the people that rely on the estate and what they need. Violet overhears Rose and Edith talking about a secret of Rose's, so knows something is up. She pretends she already knows to get Rosamund to give her the details, tricking her. The whole family go to Dun Eagle Castle. Shrimpy and Susan do not get along, which everyone can see. Shrimpy will be sent abroad soon, and Susan hates the idea. Susan is also hard on Rose, and this reminds Cora of Sybil, which makes her upset. Shrimpy tells Robert how a divorce would ruin his career. Susan gets Mrs. O'Brien to do her hair. Shrimpy learns that he will be sent to Bombay. Robert is jealous of all the trappings of tradition that Shrimpy follows, until the other man tells him that he is selling Dun Eagle because he is broke. This makes Robert grateful for all Matthew and Tom have done. When the Flinchers leave for Bombay, Robert and Cora will take charge of Rose. Isobel, staying behind in Yorkshire, spends some time with Dr. Clarkson. She suggests to Tom, who also stays behind, that he spend time with the servants. Isobel accepts Dr. Clarkson's invitation to the fair, at which he tries to propose to her, but she preempts him to say that she's happy with how her life is right now. Well, not for long. These intriguers. See what they get up to in seasons 4 through 6 in the next video. This was TV Tuesday, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share, subscribe, click the bell, visit my blog at empatheticwriter.wordpress.com, and follow me on Patreon for exclusive content and a shout out on a video. Merch, 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 merch. Yeah. Check out my new shop at cafepress.com/AlexVoltrades for all kinds of products with my face on them.